Hey guys, tonight we travel to a city unlike any other, a place where the stones have heard the prayers of kings, prophets, and wanderers for thousands of years, where light spills over golden domes at dawn and shadows stretch across ancient walls as the day fades. Before we begin, if you enjoy quiet, dark stories from the past, you can support the channel with a free subscription. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I read every comment. It's always wild to see people tuning in from all over the world. So settle in and let the noise of the day fade away. This is Jerusalem, a city of myth, memory, and dreams. If you drift off before we reach the last page, that's okay. Some stories are meant to finish in sleep. In the heart of the ancient world, where 3 continents meet and countless civilizations have left their mark, stands a city unlike any other on earth. Jerusalem, its very name, whispers of peace, yet its stones have witnessed more stories, more legends, and more divine encounters than perhaps any other place where humans have built their homes. Picture this golden city as twilight falls across the Judean hills. The limestone walls catch the last rays of sunlight, glowing warm and honey-colored against the deepening purple sky. Ancient olive trees cast long shadows across paths that have been walked for thousands of years. The air carries the scent of jasmine and burning incense, mixed with the earthy smell of old stone that has absorbed centuries of prayers, tears, and whispered hopes. Tonight, we journey not through the political complexities or historical debates that surround this sacred place, but through the realm of stories, the myths and legends that have grown like flowering vines around Jerusalem's ancient walls. These are tales passed down through generations, stories that speak to something deeper than facts and dates. They touch the part of the human heart that yearns for meaning, for connection to something greater than ourselves. Here in this city that 3 great faiths call holy, heaven seems closer to earth than anywhere else. The very stones seem to hold memories of prophets and kings, of miracles and divine visions. As the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky above Jerusalem, we settle in to listen to the stories that have made this place the spiritual center of half the world. The night wind whispers through the narrow streets of the old city, carrying with it the echoes of ancient voices, storytellers who gathered in these same courtyards thousands of years ago, sharing tales of wonder and faith by the light of oil lamps. Their stories live on, woven into the very fabric of Jerusalem itself, waiting to unfold like petals opening to the morning sun. Long before kings built their palaces and priests raised their temples, before the first prayer was whispered or the first song of praise was sung, the land where Jerusalem now stands was touched by divine hands. The creation myths of this sacred city reach back to the very beginning of time itself, to moments when the world was young and the boundary between heaven and earth was thin as morning mist. In the soft light of dawn, when shadows still pool in the valleys and dew sparkles on every blade of grass, you can almost see the ancient stories playing out across the landscape. The hills around Jerusalem roll like sleeping giants beneath a pale gold sky, and somewhere among them lies the very spot where, according to legend, creation began. The oldest stories tell us that Jerusalem stands at the center of the world, the point from which all existence expanded like ripples on a still pond. In the beginning, before the first day dawned, this place was already special, chosen by divine wisdom as the foundation stone of all creation. The rabbis of old called it the Even Hashtia, the foundation stone from which the entire world was built. Picture the scene: darkness everywhere, deep and complete, with no sun or moon or stars to break the endless night. Then, In a single moment that lasted forever and no time at all, light begins to gather at one precise point. It grows slowly at first, like the first hint of sunrise on the horizon, then blazes forth with such brilliance that the darkness flees to the far corners of existence. This first light, pure and perfect, touches the hilltop where Jerusalem would one day stand. From this sacred ground, the light spreads outward in all directions. To the north and south, east and west, the divine radiance flows like honey, giving shape to mountains and valleys, calling forth seas and rivers, painting the sky with clouds and stars. The foundation stone beneath what would become the holy city served as the anchor point for all creation, the place where heaven touched earth and made everything possible. But Jerusalem's creation stories don't begin with cosmic expansion. They also speak of much more intimate moments when the divine walked among the hills and valleys like a gardener tending a beloved plot of land. In these gentler tales, we see hands shaping the landscape with the tenderness of an artist molding clay, choosing each curve of the hills and each bend of the streams with infinite care. The name Jerusalem itself carries the weight of these ancient stories. In Hebrew, it means foundation of peace or city of peace, suggesting that from its very beginning, this place was meant to be a haven of harmony and divine presence. But other interpretations whisper of even deeper meanings, teaching of peace or vision of peace, as if the city itself was meant to be a lesson written in stone and planted in human hearts. According to some of the most ancient tales, this land was first inhabited by beings who were neither fully human nor fully divine, giants who walked with one foot in the earthly realm and one in the heavenly. These Nephilim, as some stories call them, were the children of heaven and earth, blessed with wisdom beyond human understanding, but cursed with the restlessness that comes from belonging fully to neither world. The giant Melchizedek appears in many of these early stories, a figure of mystery and power who ruled over the city that would become Jerusalem long before Abraham's time. He was both king and priest, keeper of ancient wisdom and guardian of sacred rituals that connected the earth to heaven. In the cool of the evening, when shadows lengthen across the valleys, some say you can still hear echoes of his voice, blessing the land and calling down divine protection on all who dwell there. These earliest inhabitants understood something that later generations would sometimes forget, that this land was not merely a place to build cities and grow crops, but a bridge between worlds. They built their altars on the highest hills, not to be closer to the sky, but to mark the places where heaven naturally bent down to touch the earth. Their stones were arranged not just for beauty or defense, but as markers in a sacred geography that mapped the invisible as carefully as the visible. As twilight deepens over the ancient hills, the creation myths whisper of how each stone in Jerusalem's walls remembers the moment it was chosen for its place. Each olive tree recalls the blessing that called it forth from the earth. Each spring of water carries within it the memory of the divine voice that first called it to flow. The very air above the city shimmers with the residue of that first creative moment when light conquered darkness and order emerged from chaos. In these quiet hours before sleep, when the day's concerns fade like mist before the morning sun, the creation stories of Jerusalem offer us a glimpse of a world where every moment is sacred, every place is holy, and every breath we take connects us to the same divine source that first brought light to the darkness and called this sacred city into being. The ancient storytellers understood that creation was not a single event lost in the distant past, but an ongoing process that continues with each sunrise, each spring rain, each child born in the shadow of the holy city. They saw in Jerusalem not just a place where great things had happened, but a place where great things continued to happen, where the divine presence that first shaped the world from formless void continued to work its wonders in the lives of ordinary people. As the moon rises full and bright over the Judean hills, casting silver light across terraces and gardens that have known the footsteps of prophets and kings, we turn to the stories that three great faiths have woven around Jerusalem's ancient stones. These are not merely historical accounts, but living myths that continue to shape hearts and minds across the world, tales of divine encounters, miraculous interventions, and moments when the ordinary world gave way to the extraordinary. The Jewish stories begin in an age when the world was younger, and the voice of the divine could be heard more clearly than thunder across the hills. In those days, a young shepherd named David wandered these very slopes, his sling at his side and songs of praise on his lips. The hills remember his footsteps still, and on quiet nights when the wind is just right, you might catch the echo of his harp strings in the rustling of olive leaves. David's first glimpse of Jerusalem came not as a conqueror, but as a dreamer. Standing on the Mount of Olives as the morning sun painted the limestone walls with gold, he saw not just a Jebusite fortress perched on a rocky hill, but a vision of something greater, a city that could serve as a bridge between heaven and earth, a place where the divine presence could dwell among mortal men and women. The capture of Jerusalem was accomplished not through brutal siege, but through cleverness and divine favor. David's warriors crept through the water tunnels that honeycombed the rock beneath the city, emerging like spirits into the heart of the stronghold while its defenders slept. It was as if the city itself had chosen to surrender, recognizing in David the one destined to transform it from a mere fortress into something eternal. But David's greatest dream was never fulfilled in his lifetime. He longed to build a house for the divine presence that had guided him through all his adventures, a temple that would anchor heaven to earth and provide a place where prayers could rise like incense to the throne of the Almighty. Instead, that honor was reserved for his son Solomon, whose wisdom would become legendary throughout the ancient world. Picture Solomon in the early days of his reign, standing where his father had stood, looking out over the city that was becoming the jewel of the ancient Near East. The young king had been visited in a dream and offered anything his heart desired. Instead of wealth or long life or victory over his enemies, Solomon asked for wisdom, the ability to distinguish between good and evil, to judge his people fairly, to understand the deep mysteries of existence. The construction of Solomon's temple was itself a work of myth and wonder. Master craftsmen came from distant lands, bringing with them secrets of architecture and engineering that seemed to border on magic. The stones fit together so perfectly that no hammer or chisel was heard during construction, as if the building raised itself through divine will. Cedars from Lebanon were floated down the coast and carried up the hills by workers who sang as they labored, their voices harmonizing with the ring of bronze and the whisper of silk. When the temple was finally complete, the stories tell us, the divine presence descended like a cloud so thick that the priests could barely see their hands before their faces. The very air seemed to vibrate with holiness, and those who entered the sacred precincts spoke in hushed whispers, aware that they walked in a place where heaven and earth were one. But the Jewish myths of Jerusalem speak not only of triumph and glory, but of loss and exile and the unquenchable hope of return. When the temple fell and its people were scattered to the four corners of the earth, they carried with them not just memories, but living stories that kept Jerusalem alive in their hearts, even when they could no longer see its walls. As the centuries rolled by like clouds across the sky, new stories began to gather around Jerusalem's ancient stones. In the time of Roman rule, when the city groaned under foreign occupation and the people longed for deliverance, a carpenter's son from Nazareth walked these streets and taught in these courtyards, weaving parables that would echo through the ages. The Christian myths of Jerusalem center on this figure, Jesus of Nazareth, whose brief ministry in and around the holy city would reshape the spiritual landscape of the world. Picture him walking the narrow streets of the old city, his sandals silent on stones worn smooth by countless pilgrims. His voice carries clearly in the still air as he teaches crowds gathered in the temple courts, speaking in riddles and stories that puzzle his listeners even as they pierce their hearts with truth. The stories tell of his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, riding a donkey through gates that had welcomed conquerors and kings. But this was a different kind of triumph, one marked not by the clash of weapons or the cries of the defeated, but by palm branches and shouts of joy from those who recognized in this humble figure the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. In the upper room of a house, somewhere in the city, on the night before his death, Jesus shared a final meal with his closest followers. The myths surrounding this Last Supper speak of bread that became body, wine that became blood, and words that established a covenant as enduring as the stars themselves. The very room seems to hold the memory of that night, when time stood still and eternity was revealed in the breaking of bread. But it is the events of the following day that have most deeply marked Jerusalem's mythic landscape. The Via Dolorosa, the Way of Sorrows, traces the path from the place of judgment to the place of execution. Every stone along this route has absorbed the prayers and tears of countless pilgrims who have followed in those footsteps, seeking to understand the mystery of suffering and sacrifice. The crucifixion itself, according to Christian myth, took place on Golgotha, the place of the skull, where the blood of the innocent fell upon ground that had thirsted for redemption since the first sin stained the earth. As darkness covered the land and the earth shook beneath the weight of cosmic injustice, the veil in the temple tore from top to bottom, symbolizing the end of one age and the beginning of another. 3 days later, in a garden tomb carved from the living rock, the greatest miracle in Christian mythology unfolded. Death itself was conquered, and hope was reborn with the rising sun. The empty tomb became a symbol not just of victory over mortality, but of the possibility of transformation, of new life emerging from apparent defeat. As Islam emerged in the Arabian Peninsula several centuries later, Jerusalem once again became the focus of divine encounter and mythic wonder. The Islamic stories speak of a night journey, the Isra and Miraj, when the Prophet Muhammad was carried from Mecca to Jerusalem on a miraculous steed called Burak, whose hoofbeats barely touched the earth as they flew through the night sky. Picture this scene: the Prophet sleeping peacefully in his home in Mecca when the angel Gabriel appears with a mount unlike any earthly horse. Burak is described as white as lightning, with wings like an eagle and a human face that speaks of wisdom beyond mortal understanding. Together, prophet and steed journey through the star-filled night, crossing vast distances in the span of a heartbeat. They land on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where the prophet joins in prayer with all the prophets who had come before: Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and countless others whose names are written in the book of divine favor. The very stones of the platform seem to sing with joy at this gathering of heaven's messengers, their voices harmonizing in languages so older than human speech. From Jerusalem, the journey continues upward through the 7 heavens, each level revealing new mysteries of existence and bringing the prophet closer to the source of all creation. At each level, he meets prophets and saints who welcome him as a brother, sharing wisdom that flows like honey from their lips. The ascension through the heavens represents not just a physical journey, but a spiritual one, the soul's quest to understand its place in the cosmic order. When the prophet returns to earth, landing once again on the Temple Mount before making his way back to Mecca, he carries with him not just memories, of his extraordinary journey, but revelations that would guide his followers for generations to come. The rock from which he ascended to the heavens became sacred to Muslims worldwide, a reminder that Jerusalem serves as a bridge between earthly and heavenly realms. These religious myths, woven together like golden threads in an ancient tapestry, do not compete but complement each other in the sacred geography of Jerusalem. Each tradition sees in the city's stones and stories a reflection of its deepest hopes and holiest dreams. The myths speak not just of what happened in the past, but of what continues to happen whenever human hearts reach toward the divine and find, in the narrow streets and ancient walls of Jerusalem, a place where such reaching is answered with grace. As dawn breaks over Jerusalem, painting the ancient stones with rose and gold, certain places within the city seem to glow with an inner light that speaks of stories older than recorded time. These are the mythical locations where heaven has touched earth so often that the very ground holds memories of divine encounters, where ordinary geography becomes sacred space, and where pilgrims from around the world come seeking glimpses of the eternal. The Temple Mount rises from the heart of the old city like a golden dream made manifest in stone. This broad plateau, large enough to hold thousands of worshippers, has been sacred ground for longer than anyone can remember. As morning mist rises from the valleys surrounding the city, the mount seems to float above the earthly realm, a piece of heaven anchored to earth by the weight of prayer and the strength of faith. Here, according to the oldest stories, Abraham was called to make the ultimate sacrifice, to offer his beloved son Isaac on an altar of rough stone. Picture the old patriarch climbing the winding path up the mountainside, his son walking trustingly beside him, neither of them knowing how the story would end. The wood for the sacrifice weighs heavy on Isaac's young shoulders, while Abraham carries in his heart a burden heavier still, the command to surrender the child of promise, the son through whom all nations were to be blessed. The altar built that day was never forgotten. Generation after generation of storytellers kept alive the memory of the place where human faith met divine mercy, where the knife was stayed by an angel's voice and a ram caught in the nearby thicket provided the sacrifice instead. The rock where Isaac was bound became the foundation stone of the world, the point from which all creation expanded and to which all prayers return. Centuries later, King David purchased this same threshing floor from Araunah the Jebusite, guided by a vision that showed him the exact spot where his son Solomon would build the temple. The stories tell us that David saw an angel standing between earth and heaven, sword drawn in judgment, then slowly sheathing the blade as mercy prevailed. From that moment, this became the place where divine justice and divine love were held in perfect balance. Solomon's temple, when it finally rose on this sacred platform, was more than a building. It was a map of the universe, written in stone and bronze and gold. The outer courts represented the earthly realm where ordinary mortals could approach the divine. The inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, was heaven itself brought down to earth, a cube of perfect proportions that housed the Ark of the Covenant and the presence of the Almighty. The myths speak of the temple's construction in terms that blur the line between history and miracle. Stones quarried from the earth rang like bells when struck, each one singing its own note in a harmony that builders used to guide their work. The Great Bronze Sea, a round basin that held water for ritual purification, was cast in a single piece by craftsmen whose skills seemed touched by divine inspiration. Cherubim carved from olive wood, overlaid with gold, stretched their wings over the ark, their faces bearing expressions of joy and awe that made visitors weep just to look upon them. Also today, the golden dome of the rock crowns the Temple Mount, its gleaming surface reflecting both sky and earth in an endless dance of light. Beneath this dome lies the foundation stone itself, a rough outcropping of bedrock that bears the marks of ages. Some say you can still see the footprint of the Prophet Muhammad preserved in the stone from the night of his miraculous journey to heaven. Others claim the rock bears traces of Jacob's pillow from the night he dreamed of angels ascending and descending a ladder that reached to heaven itself. From the Temple Mount, the view extends across the Kidron Valley to the Mount of Olives, a ridge of hills that has served as Jerusalem's eastern guardian for thousands of years. The slopes are covered with ancient olive trees, whose gnarled trunks and silver leaves catch the morning light like scattered coins. These trees are descendants of groves that may have shaded Abraham, that certainly knew the footsteps of David, that watched Jesus pray in their shadow during his final night of freedom. The Mount of Olives carries its own weight of mythic meaning. Jewish tradition holds that this is where the resurrection of the dead will begin at the end of days, which is why for centuries the slopes have been covered with Jewish graves, generation after generation of the faithful choosing to rest here, facing toward the Temple Mount, waiting for the Great Awakening. The stones that mark these graves grow warm in the afternoon sun, as if the hopes and dreams buried beneath them continue to generate their own heat. Halfway down the western slope of the Mount of Olives lies the Garden of Gethsemane, where ancient olive trees spread their branches like protective arms over ground that has been watered with more tears than rain. The name itself means oil press, and it's here that the crushing weight of human sorrow and divine will came together in ways that changed the world forever. The garden's 8 ancient olive trees are said to be descendants of the very trees that shaded Jesus during his final hours of prayer. Their massive trunks, some so thick that a dozen people could barely encircle them with outstretched arms, bear the scars of centuries, lightning strikes and sword cuts, fire damage and the gentle erosion of countless touching hands. Yet they continue to produce fruit, their silvery leaves whispering secrets that only the wind can understand. In the quiet hours before dawn, when shadows pool like dark water beneath the olive branches, the garden seems to hold its breath in eternal vigil. The very stones seem to remember the weight of a figure prostrate in prayer, wrestling with destiny while his friends slept nearby. The myths tell us that the ground here drank tears that were blood, that the earth itself groaned under the weight of sorrow so profound it threatened to tear the fabric of creation. On the other side of the city, the western wall stands as the last remaining remnant of the great temple complex, its massive stones fitted together so perfectly that not even a knife blade can slip between them. This is the Kotel, the place of weeping and rejoicing, where prayers written on tiny slips of paper are tucked into cracks between the ancient blocks of limestone. The wall itself seems alive with the accumulated prayers of countless generations. Each stone has absorbed the whispered hopes and desperate pleas of pilgrims who have come seeking divine intervention. Some stones weep actual tears on certain anniversaries, droplets of moisture that seep from the rock despite the absence of rain. Others grow warm to the touch when approached by those whose hearts are pure, as if responding to the presence of sincere faith. According to the myths, the western wall is the one part of the temple that will never be destroyed, protected by divine promise and angelic guardians who stand invisible watch day and night. The Shekinah, the divine presence itself, is said to dwell here still, never having abandoned this last remnant of the house built for glory and honor. Late at night, when the crowds have dispersed and silence settles over the plaza, some say you can hear the sound of heavenly weeping for the temple that was lost and the exile that still continues. Above the wall, on the Temple Mount platform, the faithful gather for prayer 5 times each day, their voices joining in harmonies that rise like incense toward heaven. The mythical geography of this place layers story upon story, meaning upon meaning, until the very air seems thick with accumulated holiness. These sacred locations are more than tourist destinations or historical sites. They are living repositories of human longing for connection with the divine. Each stone remembers the touch of hands raised in prayer. Each shadow holds the echo of voices lifted in praise or petition. As evening approaches and shadows lengthen across the ancient city, these mythical places seem to glow with their own inner light. Windows into realms where time has no meaning, and every prayer becomes a bridge between earth and heaven. In the purple twilight that settles over Jerusalem like a blessing, the city's stones hold within them stories of conflicts that transcended the merely human, battles where earthly armies found themselves fighting alongside or against forces from realms beyond mortal sight. These are tales of divine intervention and miraculous deliverance, of treasures hidden in times of peril and wonders that defied the natural order of things. The siege stories begin in the earliest days, when Jerusalem was still called Jebus, and its walls seemed to grow from the living rock itself. Enemy armies would surround the city like storm clouds gathering on the horizon, their campfires dotting the hills like fallen stars. But time and again, those who sought to take Jerusalem by force found themselves facing more than human defenders. During the reign of King Hezekiah, when the Assyrian army of Sennacherib stretched like a vast shadow across the Judean countryside, the myths tell us that a single angel was dispatched to break the siege. Picture the Assyrian camp in the dead of night, tens of thousands of warriors sleeping in their tents, confident that morning would bring them victory and plunder. Then, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, the angel of death moved through their ranks like wind through wheat, silent and unstoppable. When dawn broke over the hills, the surviving Assyrians found their camp transformed into a vast cemetery. The stories say that 185,000 soldiers perished in that single night, not from sword or spear or disease, but from the simple presence of divine judgment. Sennacherib himself fled back to Nineveh, leaving behind siege engines and supplies that the people of Jerusalem would find useful for generations to come. The Babylonian siege, when it finally came, carried with it an air of inevitability that even divine intervention could not dispel. The prophets had spoken, the warnings had been given, and the time of judgment had arrived. Yet even in defeat, the myths speak of miracles, of sacred vessels spirited away in the night, of priests who walked through walls to hide the most precious treasures, of the Ark of the Covenant itself disappearing into realms beyond human reach. Some stories claim that the prophet Jeremiah, guided by divine vision, hid the ark and the altar of incense and the tent of meeting in a cave on Mount Nebo, sealing the entrance until the time of restoration should come. Others whisper that King Solomon, in his great wisdom, had foreseen this day and built secret chambers beneath the temple where the most sacred objects could rest safely until Israel's return from exile. The treasure myths of Jerusalem speak not only of gold and precious stones, but of objects whose value lay in their connection to the divine realm. The rod of Aaron that budded with almonds, the jar of manna that fed the Israelites in the wilderness, the stone tablets on which the finger of God had written the commandments. All of these disappeared when the temple fell, hidden away by angels or buried by faithful priests who chose death rather than reveal their secrets. During the Roman period, when Titus besieged the city and famine stalked the streets like a living thing, the myths tell of a different kind of treasure being hidden, not objects of gold or silver, but scrolls containing the accumulated wisdom of generations. Teachers and scribes, knowing that death was approaching, gathered the most precious manuscripts and sealed them in jars of clay, burying them in caves and cisterns throughout the Judean wilderness? These hidden libraries were discovered centuries later by Bedouin shepherds and archaeologists, their scrolls still readable after nearly 2,000 years in the ground. The caves that protected them seem to have been chosen with supernatural guidance, always dry, always safe from earthquakes and floods, always positioned where later generations would eventually find them when the time was right. The Roman siege itself generated its own cycle of miraculous stories. The historian Josephus recorded phenomena that defied natural explanation: chariots and armed battalions seen racing through the clouds above the city, a voice crying out from the Holy of Holies itself, warning that the divine presence was departing from the temple. On the night before the final assault, witnesses reported seeing a great light shining from the sanctuary, so bright that it turned midnight into noon, and so pure that those who looked upon it were filled with both terror and peace. When the temple finally burned, the myths tell us that the flames themselves were not ordinary fire. They burned blue and white and gold, consuming wood and stone and metal, but leaving untouched certain objects that heaven had marked for preservation. The great menorah, according to some accounts, melted and flowed like water into hidden channels beneath the Temple Mount, where it waits still for the day of restoration. The medieval period brought new stories of conflict and miracle to Jerusalem's narrative. During the Crusades, when Christian armies sought to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control, both sides reported divine interventions that seemed to favor now one army, now the other, as if heaven itself was uncertain which side better served the divine will. The Crusaders told stories of St. George himself appearing on the battlements of Jerusalem, his white horse galloping along the walls as he wielded a sword of light against the defenders. But Muslim chroniclers recorded their own miracles: springs of water appearing in the desert to refresh their armies, sandstorms that struck their enemies while leaving their own forces untouched, visions of the Prophet Muhammad himself encouraging the defenders of the Holy City. One of the most persistent treasure legends concerns the Knights Templar, who established their headquarters on the Temple Mount during the Crusader period. According to the myths, these warrior monks spent years excavating beneath the ancient platform, following maps and clues that had been hidden for centuries. They were searching not for gold or jewels, but for artifacts of power: the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, scrolls containing the secret names of God. The stories say they found what they were looking for, and more besides. Hidden chambers beneath the Temple Mount supposedly yielded treasures that gave the Templars their legendary wealth and influence. But when their order was disbanded and their leaders executed, these treasures vanished once again, hidden in new locations or spirited away to distant lands, where they remain to this day. In more recent centuries, different kinds of miracles have been reported in Jerusalem. Pilgrims speak of healings that occur at the holy sites: the lame who walk after touching the stones of the western wall, the blind who see after bathing in the pool of Siloam, the broken-hearted who find peace after praying in the church of the Holy Sepulchre. Local residents, both Jewish and Arab, tell stories of their own, of times when the city was threatened by war or disaster, only to be saved by mysterious interventions. During the Six-Day War, Israeli soldiers reported seeing the walls of the old city glowing with a soft golden light, as if the ancient stones themselves were welcoming them home. Jordanian defenders spoke of visions in the sky above the Temple Mount, figures in white who seemed to be blessing the city, regardless of who controlled it. The earthquake stories form their own category of miracle tales. Jerusalem sits on one of the most active geological fault lines in the world, yet again and again, when tremors that devastate other cities reach the holy city, they seem to lose their power. Buildings that should collapse remain standing. People who should be crushed walk away unharmed. And ancient structures that have survived for thousands of years continue to defy both time and the restless earth beneath them. These myths of conflict and miracle weave themselves through Jerusalem's streets like golden threads through dark cloth, reminding all who dwell there or visit there that this city exists on multiple levels of reality. Here, the physical and spiritual realms touch so closely that ordinary people regularly witness events that challenge their understanding of what is possible. In Jerusalem, miracles are not ancient history, but present possibility. Treasures are not just objects, but opportunities for encounter with the divine, and conflicts are never merely about territory, but always about the deepest questions of meaning and purpose that humanity has ever asked. When midnight settles over Jerusalem like a velvet cloak embroidered with stars, and the ancient city sleeps beneath layers of accumulated dreams, other stories stir in the shadows, lesser-known tales that have been passed down not through official histories or sacred texts, but in whispered conversations between grandmothers and grandchildren, in the hushed voices of mystics sharing secrets by lamplight, in the folklore of communities that have called Jerusalem home for generations uncounted. These are the hidden stories, the myths that live in the margins of the great narratives, the folk tales that speak of daily magic and small miracles, of angels who work as humble craftsmen and demons who test the faithful through ordinary challenges. They remind us that the sacred and the everyday are never far apart in this city where heaven touches earth. In the Jewish quarter of the Old City, behind walls weathered smooth by centuries of wind and rain, the storytellers speak in hushed tones of the Lamed Vav Tzadikim, the 36 hidden righteous ones whose goodness keeps the world from dissolving into chaos. These souls, according to the myths, are scattered throughout the earth, living humble lives as bakers and street sweepers, teachers and shepherds, never revealing their true nature even to themselves. But Jerusalem, it is said, is always home to at least one of these hidden saints. He might be the old man who feeds stray cats in the courtyard of a forgotten synagogue, or the woman who quietly pays the debts of neighbors who have fallen on hard times, or the young scholar who spends his nights copying sacred texts by hand because he believes that handwritten words carry more blessing than printed ones. The myths tell of miraculous occurrences that follow in the wake of these hidden saints, sick children who recover after the righteous one passes their window, businesses that prosper after receiving the blessing of what seemed like an ordinary customer, families that find reconciliation after arguing in the presence of someone whose heart holds perfect peace. The righteous ones themselves remain unaware of their power, attributing any good that happens around them to chance or the kindness of others. One persistent story tells of a hidden saint who worked as a water carrier in the days when Jerusalem's residents still depended on wells and cisterns for their daily supply. Every morning before dawn, he would fill his donkey's panniers with clay jars and begin his rounds through the narrow streets, calling out his presence with a song that seemed to make the water itself sweeter and more refreshing. Children would run to their windows when they heard his voice, not just because they were thirsty, but because his presence made them feel safe and loved. Mothers would save their most difficult questions for his visits, finding that somehow the right words always came to them after he had filled their jars and moved on to the next house. Even the donkey seemed touched by holiness, never balking or stumbling, never refusing to climb the steepest streets of the old city. When the water carrier finally died, quietly in his sleep, with a smile on his face, the entire quarter mourned him. But strange things began to happen at his grave. The earth above his resting place never grew dry, even during the harshest summers. Plants grew there more abundantly than anywhere else in the cemetery, and their leaves, when brewed into tea, seemed to have healing properties that the local physicians couldn't explain. The Christian communities of Jerusalem preserve their own collection of secret stories, many centered around the numerous small chapels and shrines that dot the city like hidden jewels. These tales speak of humble miracles and quiet saints, of divine interventions that happen not with thunder and lightning, but with the gentle persistence of rain. One such story concerns a young nun who lived in a convent near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre during the Ottoman period. Sister Miriam was known for her skill with needle and thread, but the local people whispered that her talent went beyond mere craftsmanship. The vestments she embroidered seemed to glow with their own inner light during religious ceremonies, and priests who wore her handiwork reported feeling waves of peace and strength that sustained them through their most difficult moments. The secret of Sister Miriam's gift lay not in her technique, but in her practice of praying over every stitch. As she worked, she would whisper the names of people who had asked for her intercession: the sick, the troubled, the lost. Each golden thread that passed through the fabric carried with it a prayer. Each tiny knot secured a blessing in place. When she died at the age of 93, her fingers were found to be stained permanently gold, as if the threads she had worked with for so many years had left their mark on her very flesh. The Islamic folklore of Jerusalem includes its own treasury of hidden wonders, many connected to the neighborhood known as the Muslim Quarter, where families have lived for centuries in houses built on foundations laid down in the time of Saladin. These stories often feature the figure of Khidr, the mysterious green saint who appears to help travelers and seekers in their moments of greatest need. One tale tells of a young merchant who lost his entire fortune when bandits attacked his caravan in the Judean wilderness. Arriving in Jerusalem with nothing but the clothes on his back, he sat weeping outside the Dome of the Rock, wondering how he would feed his family or hold his head up in his home village. An old man in a green robe appeared beside him, seemingly from nowhere, and sat down in companionable silence. After a while, the stranger began to speak of patience and trust, of the way that loss sometimes clears the ground for new growth, of seeds that must be buried in darkness before they can reach toward the light. When the merchant looked up from his sorrow, the old man was gone, but in his place lay a small pouch containing exactly enough coins to buy passage home and start a new business. Years later, when the merchant had rebuilt his fortune and become known throughout the region for his generosity to the poor, he would sometimes catch glimpses of the same green-robed figure in the corners of his vision, always watching, always approving, always ready to help when help was truly needed. The Armenian Quarter has its own special collection of secret stories, many centering around the ancient art of manuscript illumination that has been practiced in their monasteries for over 1,000 years. The scribes who work in the shadowy scriptoriums, copying ancient texts by the light of oil lamps, speak of pages that write themselves when the monk falls asleep over his work, of illuminated letters that sometimes seem to move and dance when viewed from the corner of the eye. Brother Hagop, who died in the early 20th century, was said to possess the ability to illuminate manuscripts not just with gold leaf and precious pigments, but with actual light captured from sacred moments. He would sit in meditation for hours before beginning work on a new page, waiting until he could see the spiritual significance of the text he was about to copy. Then his brush would move as if guided by invisible hands, creating images that seemed to glow from within the parchment itself. Visitors to the Armenian Patriarchate sometimes report seeing strange lights emanating from the library windows late at night, and scholars who have been privileged to examine Brother Hagop's manuscripts claim that the colors remain as vibrant today as they were when first applied, despite the passage of decades and the fading that affects all other illuminated texts of similar age. Perhaps the most mysterious of all Jerusalem's secret myths concerns the underground city that is said to exist beneath the visible one, a network of tunnels and chambers that mirrors the streets and buildings above ground, but operates according to different laws of time and space. This hidden Jerusalem is supposedly inhabited by figures from throughout the city's long history, prophets and sages, saints and mystics, all of them waiting for the time when their wisdom will once again be needed in the world above. Entry to this underground realm can supposedly be gained through certain wells and cisterns, but only by those who approach with the proper intentions and the right spiritual preparation. The stories describe a city of eternal twilight, where oil lamps burn without consuming oil, and where libraries hold every book that was ever written or ever will be written. Those few who claim to have visited this hidden Jerusalem return with tales of conversations with figures they recognize from ancient stories, sitting in discussion circles with King David and the Prophet Muhammad, learning healing techniques from Jesus, receiving instruction in the hidden meanings of sacred texts from teachers whose names are recorded in the most secret mystical writings. These visitors always return with gifts, sometimes a single word that unlocks the meaning of a difficult passage in Scripture, sometimes a melody that brings peace to troubled hearts, sometimes simply a feeling of deep connection to the long chain of seekers who have found in Jerusalem not just a place, but a state of consciousness where all questions find their answers and all searches reach their end. These secret myths remind us that Jerusalem's true treasures are not gold or precious stones, but the accumulated wisdom and wonder of countless generations who have found in this ancient city a place where the ordinary world becomes transparent to deeper realities. In the quiet hours of the night, when the city sleeps and dreams, these hidden stories continue to unfold, weaving themselves into the consciousness of all who have eyes to see and hearts to understand. As the last stars fade before the approaching dawn, giving way to the soft gray light that precedes sunrise over Jerusalem, we find ourselves drawn to contemplate the deeper meanings that have made this city more than just a place on ancient maps, more than just stones and mortar and human habitation. Jerusalem has become, in the collective imagination of humanity, a symbol so powerful that its very name carries within it the weight of our deepest spiritual longings and highest aspirations. The ancient mystics called Jerusalem the navel of the world, not because it stood at the geographical center of the earth, but because it served as the spiritual center from which all meaning radiated outward like ripples on a still pond. Picture the world as a vast body, breathing slowly in the rhythm of seasons and centuries, and Jerusalem as the point where the breath enters and leaves, where life and spirit meet in perfect harmony. This symbolism runs deeper than mere metaphor. In the mythic consciousness that shaped these ancient stories, Jerusalem represented the axis mundi, the world axis that connected the underworld, the earthly realm, and the heavens above. Like the cosmic tree that appears in mythologies around the world, Jerusalem served as a bridge between levels of existence, a place where gods and mortals could meet on common ground. The temple that once crowned the city was designed according to this cosmic symbolism. Its three courts, the outer court for Gentiles, the inner court for Israelites, and the Holy of Holies accessible only to the high priest, represented the three levels of spiritual reality that mystics have recognized throughout history: the ordinary world, where most people live their daily lives; the intermediate realm, where spiritual seekers undergo transformation; and the innermost sanctuary, where the individual soul meets the divine presence face to face. Even the architecture of the temple carried symbolic meaning that spoke to deeper truths about the nature of existence. The great bronze sea that stood in the courtyard represented the primordial waters of creation, the formless potential from which all things emerge. The golden menorah symbolized the tree of life, its 7 branches reaching toward heaven like arms raised in eternal praise. The altar of incense spoke of prayers rising like sweet smoke toward the throne of the Almighty. The destruction of the temple, therefore, was more than just a military defeat or a political catastrophe. In the symbolic language of myth, it represented the breaking of the connection between heaven and earth, the severing of the axis that held the world together. The myths tell us that when the temple fell, the divine presence went into exile along with the people, scattered to the 4 corners of the earth, but never abandoning them entirely. This exile became itself a powerful symbol in the mythic consciousness of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It represented not just the literal scattering of peoples, but the spiritual condition of all humanity, living in a world where the divine presence feels distant and hidden, where the connection between heaven and earth seems broken, where we struggle to find meaning and purpose in what often appears to be a meaningless universe. Yet the myths also promise that the exile is not permanent. The scattered stones of the temple will one day be gathered together and rebuilt, not by human hands, but by divine intervention. The connection between heaven and earth will be restored, and Jerusalem will once again serve as the spiritual center of a redeemed world. This hope has sustained countless generations through periods of suffering and despair, reminding them that present circumstances, however difficult, are not the final word in the human story. The symbolism of Jerusalem as a bridge between heaven and earth appears in all 3 of the great monotheistic traditions, but each interprets it slightly differently. In Jewish mythology, Jerusalem represents the place where divine law was given and where it will ultimately be perfectly fulfilled. The city symbolizes the possibility of creating a just society based on divine principles, a community where human beings can live in harmony with each other and with the will of the Creator. Christian symbolism sees in Jerusalem both the earthly city, where salvation was accomplished through suffering and sacrifice, and the heavenly city that represents the ultimate destiny of redeemed humanity. The New Jerusalem described in the book of Revelation is not just a future reality, but a present spiritual condition, the state of consciousness where divine love has completely transformed human nature. Islamic mythology understands Jerusalem as the place where earth reaches closest to heaven, where the prayers of the faithful have the greatest chance of being heard and answered. The prophet's night journey to Jerusalem and ascension through the heavens from the Temple Mount represents the spiritual journey that every believer can undertake, the gradual purification of the soul that leads ultimately to direct encounter with divine reality. But perhaps the most powerful symbolic meaning of Jerusalem lies in its representation of the human heart itself. The outer walls of the city represent the boundaries of ordinary consciousness, the defenses we build to protect ourselves from experiences that might overwhelm or transform us. The gates represent the moments of openness when we allow divine influence to enter our lives. The narrow streets and hidden courtyards symbolize the complex inner landscape of the soul, with its hidden chambers and secret treasures. The Temple Mount, in this symbolic reading, represents the center of consciousness, where the ego self meets the divine self, where individual will surrenders to cosmic will, where the small self dies and the true self is born. The Holy of Holies becomes the innermost sanctuary of the heart, the place where mystics of all traditions have found direct access to the source of all existence. This understanding helps explain why Jerusalem has inspired such passionate devotion and such fierce conflict throughout history. People have been willing to die for this city, not just because it holds religious significance, but because it represents something essential about human nature itself, our capacity for transcendence, our longing for connection with something greater than ourselves, our hope that meaning and purpose can be found in a universe that often seems random and cruel. The myths of Jerusalem remind us that we are all, in a sense, citizens of this holy city. Whether or not we ever walk its ancient streets or touch its weathered stones, we carry within ourselves the same spiritual geography that made Jerusalem sacred to countless generations. We all have our own Temple Mount, where heaven touches earth, our own Holy of Holies, where we meet the divine presence, our own Western Wall, where we pour out our prayers and petitions. The eternal Jerusalem that lives in myth and symbol is not bound by the limitations of geography or politics. It exists wherever human beings gather to seek truth, to pursue justice, to create beauty, to express love. It appears whenever someone chooses to act with compassion rather than selfishness, whenever forgiveness triumphs over revenge, whenever hope persists in the face of despair. As the sun finally breaks over the eastern hills, flooding the limestone walls of the ancient city with golden light, Jerusalem stands revealed not just as a place but as a possibility, the possibility that heaven and earth can meet, that the divine and human can work together, that the world as it is can be transformed into the world as it should be. This is the ultimate meaning of all the myths and legends we have explored together, the message that echoes through every story ever told about this most sacred of cities. As our journey through the myths and legends of Jerusalem draws to its close, and the first light of dawn touches the ancient stones that have witnessed so many sunrises across the centuries, we find ourselves changed by the stories we have shared together. Like pilgrims who have walked the narrow streets and touched the weathered walls of the holy city, we carry within us now something of its eternal magic, something of its timeless wisdom. The stories we have explored tonight are more than just tales from distant ages. They are living bridges that connect us to the hopes and dreams of countless generations who found in Jerusalem a symbol of everything the human heart yearns for: peace and justice, love and forgiveness, the triumph of light over darkness, the promise that suffering is not the final word in the human story. Picture Jerusalem now as morning breaks over its golden walls, the last shadows retreating into doorways and courtyards, where they will wait patiently for evening to come again. The city awakens slowly, gently, like a dreamer emerging from sleep, filled with beautiful visions. The call to prayer echoes from ancient minarets, church bells ring across the valleys, and the faithful make their way through streets that have known the footsteps of prophets and kings, saints and sages, ordinary people who found in this place something extraordinary. The myths we have shared remind us that Jerusalem exists on many levels, as a physical city built of limestone and dreams, as a spiritual symbol that transcends geography and politics, and as a state of consciousness that can be reached by anyone who seeks with a sincere heart. The temple may lie in ruins, but its spiritual reality continues in every act of worship, every gesture of kindness, every moment when heaven touches earth through human hands and hearts. The treasures hidden in Jerusalem's secret chambers are not gold or precious stones, but truths about the nature of existence that remain as valuable today as they were thousands of years ago. The real riches of this city lie in its reminder that we are more than just material beings struggling for survival, that there is meaning and purpose woven into the fabric of existence, that love is stronger than hate and hope more enduring than despair. As you prepare to rest, carry with you the peace that flows like a gentle stream through all the stories of Jerusalem, the peace that comes from knowing you are part of something larger than yourself, connected to a chain of seekers that stretches back to the very beginning of human consciousness and forward to whatever destiny awaits our species among the stars. The winds that blow through Jerusalem tonight carry whispers of ancient prayers and eternal promises. They speak of a time when all the exiles will return, when all the scattered fragments will be gathered together, when the city of peace will finally live up to its name. But they also remind us that this future begins now, in this moment, in whatever small choices we make to bring more light into the world. Sleep now in the embrace of these timeless stories, knowing that the same divine presence that walked with Abraham and Moses, that spoke through Jesus and Muhammad, that inspired countless unnamed saints and sages, is with you still. The Jerusalem that lives in myth and symbol is as close as your own heartbeat, as near as your next breath, as accessible as your willingness to believe that the impossible can become possible when heaven touches earth. In your dreams tonight, may you walk the golden streets of the eternal city, where every stone sings with joy, where every shadow holds a blessing, and where every soul finds at last the peace it has been seeking since the world began. And when you wake, may you carry with you the knowledge that you are a citizen of that city too, a keeper of its stories, a guardian of its light. The night embraces Jerusalem with gentle arms, and in that embrace, all the myths and legends we have shared continue to unfold, weaving themselves into new hearts, inspiring new dreams, keeping alive the hope that one day, in ways we cannot yet imagine, all the ancient promises will be fulfilled and every tear will be wiped away. Rest well, traveler, in the knowledge that the journey continues, and that somewhere in the world tonight, new stories are being born that will join the eternal chorus of voices singing the praise of the city, where heaven meets earth, where love conquers all, and where every ending becomes a new beginning.